Welcome to the Lansdowne Library's Geek Out podcast, where we geek out about just about anything.
I am your one co-host, David.
I'm the other co-host, Jeff. And today we are talking with Sadie Boyle about the Ace Attorney franchise.
Hey.
All right, so I guess we should start with the most basic but probably most important question. What is Ace Attorney?
Okay, so Ace Attorney is essentially a Japanese video game that was translated into English officially about a lawyer named Phoenix Wright, who is a defense attorney, and he has to defend a number of clients. And you play as Phoenix and go through a bunch of investigations with your assistant Maya, and face off against, in the first game, it's the prosecutor Miles Edgeworth. In other games, it's different prosecutors. There's also games where Phoenix isn't the protagonist, but those are like later in the series.
So what is it about the Ace Attorney franchise that you think makes it great?
I think, well, part of the reason I really like the Ace Attorney games is because I like playing video games, but I'm not very good at them because my reflexes are very bad. So I think it's really cool to be able to think through the things, and that's like how you move through the game, is that you have to be able to think through the cases and try and figure out the endings and all that. And also, I just really like the plot. I think the plot is really interesting. I don't know, just that murder mystery stuff it's just really fun to me.
It's kind of the cozy murder video game as opposed to those, like Murder, She Wrote and things like that. Although, honestly, I feel most apt comparison would probably be like Columbo, since you are actively solving the crime.
Yeah, it's like a murder mystery, but it's not like, at least for the most part, dark and gritty. It's pretty, like, goofy.
It's very much almost an interactive visual novel.
Yeah. It's been considered to be like what got the visual novel franchises to actually take root here in the States.
Yeah, no, it's like basically a visual novel. And there also aren't that many endings. Like some games that are similar, like there are multiple endings that you can get. But like there is like pretty much a strict story within Phoenix Wright, even though there are like some dialogue options that will be different. So essentially the endings within Ace Attorney are basically just like win or lose.
Yeah, I have a lot of very vivid memories of just like the giant judge looming over you when you fail the case. It's a very memorable game over screen.
Like that's one thing about the game, is that it's like in the trials, it's like they'll play the music. And then when you object, if you object the wrong thing, the music will keep playing. And if you object the right thing, the music will stop. So that's like, it's like stressful. It's like stressful to hear the music keep playing because it's like crap. I do really like the music in Ace Attorney, though. I think it's really good.
I recall it being fantastic, personally. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you first get interested in the Ace Attorney franchise?
I'd heard briefly about it, but I wasn't aware of much of the plot. Then, like, over the beginning of the pandemic, I think someone mentioned something about, like, Edgeworth's storyline. I was like, huh? Because I, like, very much assumed it was a very, like, basic game without much of a plot outside of the murder. So I was like, huh? What? So I decided to look more into it. And I was like, wow, some of these plot lines are kind of buck wild, but, like, in a fun way. And so I kind of just, like, went down the rabbit hole. I was like, you know what? I kind of have to buy these games now, don't I?
Pandemic gaming has struck again, giving people an opportunity to play things just outside of the comfort zone, and everyone's just going right into it. Love it.
Feels a little more productive than my pandemic obsession with Animal Crossing.
I could second that. So, I assume you just played them chronologically?
Yeah, for the most part. But, like, I played, like, the first 3 games, and then one of my friends decided to buy, like, there's the original trilogy, right, with Phoenix Wright, obviously. Yep. And then one of my friends decided to buy, Apollo Justice, which is the 4th game in the series, technically. But between those 2 games, Phoenix Wright 3 and Apollo Justice, there actually is also a spin-off game, which I only, like, recently really started. But yeah, I have mostly played them in order. But I did, like, play Apollo Justice with my friend.
That's what the Miles Edgeworth investigation. That's the spin-off between, right?
Yeah. the first one is the only one that's officially been localized, but I'm pretty sure like there's like a fan translation out there of the second one.
Yeah, that's been an ongoing problem for Ace Attorney fans. I think we only recently got the great Ace Attorney spin-off games as well, which Japan had for I want to say almost 10 years that first game, and we only now have gotten an official translation.
Yeah, those two games had been like not been translated for a long time. I remember I was in school when it was announced they were getting localized, and I like freaked out. Like while in class, but I don't think Miles Edgeworth Investigations 2 is ever going to be localized, just because I'm pretty sure the original team that worked on the game was like disbanded, and therefore it would be a lot harder to get an official translation.
Unfortunately happens with a handful of games. Just ask Earthbound fans how they feel about waiting on a translation.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of that.
But save yourself the time. Just don't.
That game, I believe, came out just after the first of the Ace Attorney games. It still does not have an actual official translation. But getting a little back on topic, as we briefly mentioned, Ace Attorney is a franchise about court cases. Half of the game is spent gathering evidence and then actually fighting it out in court. Were there any cases that, have stood out to you? Any that are particular favorites?
My two favorite cases throughout the entire series are both cases within the first game. I do like a lot of the other ones, but like the two cases in the first two games are my absolute favorites. One is Turnabout Goodbyes, which is... Am I allowed to spoil things on here?
We usually do light spoilers, so,
Okay. So,
it's those hard calls. It's, that this is a spoiler for a game that I want to say is, like, technically now 10 years old?
Okay.
More than that, yeah. This is originally technically a Game Boy Advance game.
Well, then we can let everyone know in the...
Yeah, spoiler warning.
Listeners.
I'm going to try and spoil not too much, but Turnabout Goodbyes is like it was originally the last case in the game before another case was added, which is actually my other favorite case. But this case essentially surrounds Miles Edgeworth, who has been your main rival throughout the entire rest of the game, getting accused of a murder. And you have to defend him against the person who's accusing him, who has a really long win record, spanning over like a good couple decades. And he's like been known to be like a really bad person, to put it lightly.
Yeah, that is very much putting it mildly.
And you have to prevent Miles Edgeworth from getting arrested. And at some point, what ties in is the murder of Edgeworth's father, who had been killed years before, and like it seems like a good amount of Edgeworth's issues are spanning from that. And we find out that he and Phoenix were childhood friends. And it's a really interesting case that left me like really emotional by the end. And yeah, I think that one's a really good one. And also the depth that is given to Maya throughout the case, I also think is really good. And the last scene with Maya in that case, I think about it a lot. The other case that is one of my favorites throughout the series is Rise from the Ashes, which is a case, again, right after Turnabout Goodbyes, which was originally supposed to be the last case in the game, but they put another one in, which is a case that is really long. It's really long, and introduces some...
The selling point of the DS remake for Japan, this whole brand new case.
Yeah, and because it's a whole new case made for the DS, there's also some different game mechanics added, you can actually inspect the evidence, and one of the things is you're supposed to blow on things.
Oh yeah, that was how you got fingerprints, right? You had to dust it and then actually blow on the DS microphone.
Yeah, you had to do that. And also it introduced I like that case a lot because I think the case itself is very interesting, again, even though it's really long. But I also really like the characters introduced in that case, even though most of them are one-off, except for Emma Skye, who comes back in Apollo Justice. But there's Emma and Lana, who are kind of meant to mirror Mia and Maya from earlier in the game, and I like them both. And there's also a cowboy named Jake Marshall, who I think is very good. I really like him. He's very entertaining. and Angel Star, who's a detective, well, an ex-detective, and she's like, I feel like there's a way to describe her that I'm like not thinking of. She just like feels like a very stereotypical, like, I don't know how to describe her, but like I really like her. She's very cool.
Yeah, I recall her design being like incredibly visually striking.
Yes.
Also, for some reason, every time you meet her, she's trying to sell you a bento box.
Yeah, because that's like her new job, I guess. I adore her.
Wasn't she like? Doesn't the judge at one point get kind of bribed because of
Yes,
that?
yeah, she
Had
has
to call
the
him out on it.
She has the judge lunge. I remember that. Now, as a few people have probably noticed, just listening to some of these names, the localization of this game is full of terribly wonderful puns.
I think it's because the original game also had like a lot of puns. So when they were translating it, they of course had to translate the pun jokes. So yeah, basically almost all of the characters' names are puns. Like Phoenix Wright, Apollo Justice, obviously, like lawyer jokes. There's a character in Miles Edgeworth Investigations, I think, that's called Dead Man. Can you guess what his role in the story is?
A little less subtle than Clue's Mr. Body, I guess.
Yeah, there's like basically all of the characters are just puns. That's basically all their names. Another one is Clavier Gavin, which I think is a very funny pun, just because the word clavier is literally just the word piano in German.
Right, yeah, the piano, of course.
Yeah, but also one thing I'd like to note that I kind of like is that, like I said before, there's a fan translation of Ace Attorney Miles Edgeworth Investigations 2. And I like that the fan translators, whoever they were, I'm not exactly sure, also kept up with the puns when they were translating it. Like, there's a prosecutor in the game who they call Sebastian de Best. Like, he's de best.
Yes.
And there's a judge in the game that they call Justine Courtney. And I don't know, I just think that's neat.
You gotta hand it to a dedicated translation fan base. They will do their hardest to do it right.
How about you, Dave? Were there any cases that you particularly remembered?
Oh, boy. You know what? I mostly remember the defendants. Because the one that comes to mind, I can't remember his name. It's in the second game, but it's the guy...
Ungard?
Which one?
Matt Ungard?
No,
Is it Max Galactica?
Yes.
Oh, Max Galactica.
Max, because the second his facade cracks, he goes from like this fancy, mystical man to like a southern...
Oh, yeah,
he has like a southern drawl.
Like he's keeping up this character the whole time, but the second anything stops going his way, he's
panics, loses it.
I think his real name was something like Billy Bob.
I think it is.
I don't remember what it is, but I think you're right.
It was that was hysterical. Yeah.
Yeah, it says a lot about the character that it's like, well, first, there's only about 4 cases a game. So I guess after, between the two we picked, we had a 50-50 chance there. I think as far as my favorite case went, it's a Reunion and Turnabout, I think was the name, which is a very bizarre case for people not familiar with the franchise because it heavily involves the fact that one of the main characters can literally channel the dead.
Oh, that's right. We should probably explain. There's
a big supernatural element to these games.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, the murder victim was trying to get the ghost of a woman to sign a confession saying things were her fault. It was a very unique case. It's very hard to talk about this case without spoiling it. But, it has some terrible character puns with the twins Eeny, Meeny, and Mini, Meeny.
Yeah, that's a good case, though.
It was a fantastic case and, helps introduce, each game introduces some new mechanics. That would be what the second game had, the spirit locks.
The psych locks.
Locks, yes.
Can I explain the psych locks?
By all means.
Okay.
Here.
Please do, because I still can't figure it out.
Okay, so in the second game, there's introduced the psych locks, which, forgive me if I mispronounce this, but Phoenix gets Magatama from Pearl, I think, who is Maya's younger cousin. and it helps him see Cyclops, which is essentially like if a character says something that reveals that they have some sort of secret they're hiding, either one or multiple Cyclops will appear depending on like how deep that secret is hidden. And actually, I don't think this is revealed in Ace Attorney 2, but later, at some point, it's revealed that there's also the possibility, it might be revealed in Ace Attorney 2. I don't think so, though. You can also see black Cyclops, the normal ones being red, and black Cyclops means that they're hiding a secret even they don't know about.
I don't remember that in 2.
I don't think it's in Ace Attorney 2.
It's in 2. I think that only shows up in 3. Like, the big surprise thing in 2 was you bump into the character, and like the first time you talk to them, there's just immediately like 6 Cyclops appear.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about names, but Sadie, who is your favorite character or characters from the series?
This might have been slightly given away by the fact that my favorite case in the game is Turnabout Goodbyes, but my favorite character in the game is Miles Edgeworth, because, I don't know, he's like a really interesting character. Like, obviously, like, his backstory and the fact that he's, like, a bad person, obviously, within the first game. But, like, throughout the first game and throughout the rest of the franchise, he, like, starts to become, like, a better person, and, like, he's, like, clearly trying, and, like, you understand why he does the things he does. And, like, also, just the fact that he's kind of just, like, within the first game, he's, like, mean, but it's kind of funny, you know?
He's never, like, you know, a mustache twirling evil. He's just kind of a jerk to you, and usually he's right.
He's just a jerk, and it's, like, comical in the way that he's a jerk. Like, he, like, dishes out insults that are, like, it's, like, funny.
Yeah.
And also, you can continue if you want.
No, go ahead.
And, like, in games like Miles Edgeworth Investigations, you kind of, like, learn things about him where it's, like, in the main games, he's, like, very much, like, like, on the surface, he seems like a cool, composed prosecutor, but, like, in Miles Edgeworth Investigations especially, you realize, like, oh, he's kind of just, like, a nerd, isn't he? Like, at some point, it's revealed that he's a big fan of the children's series, The Steel Samurai, and, like, it's like, oh, so he's just, like, a nerd, then. Cool.
I don't know if you've checked them out yet, but there is a series of Phoenix Wright manga, comics.
I've seen some of it, but I can't afford it.
They are available at your local library.
That is how I read all of them.
Is it actually?
Yes, it is.
They are all available in our system for checkout.
Yeah, and I highly recommend it because Miles, he's not really the prosecutor in any of them, but more often than not, in the middle of a case that happens, he just sort of seems to stumble in. And there's some really good, like, buddy-buddy moments with him and Phoenix where there's a bit of headbutting, but for the most part, they just kind of show off that they are still friends.
Yeah. That's another thing that I like about, like, the development of Miles, is that especially, like, in, like, the later games, we kind of just, like, see that, oh, so they are, like, they're friends, like, clearly.
It's just because they're on, you know, opposite sides of the court doesn't mean they can't still be friends.
Yeah, something similar happens with Von Karma as well. There's a very funny comic where Nick and Maya are just out doing something, and of course the murder happens, and they run into Von Karma, and they're like, "Why are you here?" And she's like, "Well, I had to fill in for a friend at this stupid thing, and now there's a murder, so I'm here," and that's the excuse. That's great.
Francisca is probably either my second or third favorite character in the game, just because, like Miles Edgeworth, like, she's, like, a very, like, complex character, but she also can be kind of just a goofy character. Like, the way she overuses fool so much, like...
What is it? The foolish fool who does foolish things foolishly is an actual line of dialogue.
She's just really... She's really funny. And, like, when you learn, like, her backstory, like, that's all really interesting, but she's also kind of just... She's trying to be so threatening that it's almost comical.
Yeah, it kind of loops back around to just being over the top.
Yeah, especially because, like, the Ace Attorney games are obviously very over-the-top games, and the way they do this with Francisca is having her literally bring a whip into court. Literally a weapon.
Yeah.
And she uses it on Phoenix.
And the judge in at least one situation.
And I think she also has used it on, like, witnesses and defendants.
Yeah. Again, I vaguely remember that breaking Max Galactica for a period.
So many good characters. And I think that's why Phoenix being sort of the straight man, but also probably the most relaxed of them, despite being also simultaneously the most
super
stressed.
stressed.
That's just what makes his character great, is that he's just kind of this foil for this justice system that is as important and as serious as it needs to be, but also the people are what make it completely wacky.
Like, I like Phoenix because he simultaneously is very much like a snarky straight man, but like he also does some of the more absurd things in the game. In my opinion,
parrot, for example,
he cross-examines a parrot. There's one part in one of the newer games where he defends a killer whale. And there's also the fact that before I started playing the games, I assumed that Phoenix was like a very like smart, calm, and collected person. And like he is to an extent, but also he's like never prepared for court. And the entire reason he became a lawyer was just because his childhood friend didn't answer his phone calls and he couldn't come up with any better ideas, I guess.
This is a bit of an elaborate ruse to meet somebody again. Just for the sake of posterity, how about your favorite character then?
Oh, well, I'm thinking about it right now. It's hard to say because just there's so many good characters.
I mean, yeah.
But I gotta say, I do love Maya a lot.
She is a lot of fun.
Mostly because she's got that energy of just being not like clueless, but definitely the kind of person that runs into a room without really looking around and taking, doesn't read the room right away. She's kind of headstrong, and that's why every game opens with her in some indefendable position that she somehow got herself into that you have to then get her out.
She does get accused of murder an awful lot.
Yeah, and it always just seems to be like she just happened to be there.
Oftentimes just in the wrong place. Personally, as far as favorites go, I've always had a soft spot for Gumshoe.
Oh, Gumshoe!
Because it's just, for the people unfamiliar with the game, Dick Gumshoe is... He is your contact within the police. I've never been entirely clear where he stands on the force. I know he's a detective, but he is often threatened with demotion for speaking to the opposing lawyer. But he's just this lovable oaf that, like, basically every interaction with Gumshoe goes that he has been told not to give you a specific piece of evidence, but in doing so, he tells you about that specific piece of evidence.
His name is also another very good pun, because Dick and Gumshoe are both words for detective.
He may as well have just been named Detective.
Another good name, and I'm just going to throw this in here real quick, because it always sticks in my mind, is Phoenix's old buddy, Larry Butts.
Larry Butts, of course.
Because of the quote, if something smells, it's probably the butts. That lives rent-free in my head.
Entirely fair. The other one I always remember is Lotta Hart.
I love Lotta Hart's name. It's very nice.
It's just such a simple pun, and it's in a game full of ridiculous names, hers almost seems normal. Lord knows there's a character literally named Old Bag.
Oh my god!
Who is also a fantastic recurring character.
A crush on Miles Edgeworth.
Yep.
It's just
so
really funny.
It's so choice. And like she always appears when you least expect her.
It's one of those things, because when you first meet her, she's a security guard, so it makes sense for her to be in your way, but much like Lotta Hart, they have to kind of come up with excuses for her to be at these crime scenes because they wanted to use the character again.
I would argue that's a good example of why the writing is actually phenomenal, is because it's kind of ridiculous, but the way these stories go and how they utilize these characters just makes it that more impactful.
Yeah, and then it never does feel forced. We have a lot of recurring characters, which, in anything where you're dealing with a lot of murders should be a red flag.
Yeah, like, it doesn't make sense, but it's very Ace Attorney whenever a character, like, shows up in some random place at some random time. Where, like, it doesn't completely seem to make sense, but, like, it makes sense.
You end up with a lot of, like, odd through lines because it's finding out that Miles is a big fan of the Silver Samurai, who is one of your defendants. You have to prove his innocence in a court case.
I really like Will Powers as a defendant personally. I would just like to state because I don't know, he's just like a lovable guy, and the rest is. And originally, when you meet him, all the characters are like, "Oh no, he's so creepy looking."
Yeah, he's just got a kind of creepy face, but he's heart of gold.
Now we've talked about the games and briefly the comics, but there's also an anime.
There's an anime
and a live action film.
And there's also multiple stage plays.
Including 2 musicals, apparently.
What? Okay, that's news to me.
Yeah, I doing my due diligence for research, I discovered that there is an all-female theater troupe that has done 2 separate musicals.
I've seen part of one of the musicals, and I remember just feeling so strange watching it, and I had to do something. I was like, I'm probably going to come back to this, and I didn't. But from what I can tell, okay, can I talk about the stage musical for a sec? I want to
absolutely, because
I think I'm one of the only people that's seen it that's currently in the fan base for Ace Attorney. It feels very I mentioned Rise from the Ashes earlier. It follows a very similar plot, except it also changes Phoenix's backstory. Not adds to it; they change it. Where, spoilers, I guess, Phoenix's backstory is that when he was a kid, he'd lost his lunch money at some point, and no, he didn't lose his lunch money. He was accused of stealing someone else's lunch money. And then Miles defends him from the rest of the class who think he did it. And that was apparently really impactful to him, and they ended up becoming friends, and that's how they know each other. Within the stage...
For the record, the thief was Larry Butts.
His thief was Larry. Larry also kind of sticks up for Phoenix, but that's less impactful considering he did it.
He was the person who did it, yeah.
He's making up for it.
And in the musical, they have it so both Miles and a girl who I forget's name, who they add for the sake of this musical, defend him. And also, she and Phoenix were dating at some point. And so there's a huge plot involving them, and then I'm pretty sure she's just dropped for the second musical. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure.
I wonder why.
Well, I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense because you needed an extra singer maybe for that scene or somebody to play off of them. And, the primary female protagonist especially in the early games, is not really looked at as a romantic partner. There's a big age difference there.
Yeah.
So I guess it would make sense for a musical to have to kind of shoehorn in a love interest.
Yeah, and she's the defendant in the case, and there's also a song. This is the main thing I remember from it. I remember the plot, and I remember that there's one song where it's Edgeworth singing, and then 6 other people dressed as Edgeworth come up, background singers and background dancers.
Oh, I'm gonna have to find a video.
Yeah, yeah. I think I know what I'm doing tonight.
That sounds too silly not to see.
I think I had it saved on my phone for a while because I kept talking about it to people because it was so weird looking.
As somebody who consumes a fair amount of Japanese media, sometimes it gets really weird with it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of franchises that it's just, the West never gets all of it because some of it is just bizarre and untranslatable. Everything has stage productions or radio dramas that we just don't get here.
I've seen some of the stage versions, though. Some of the stage plays. Because there are some translations on YouTube or whatever of them. And the stage plays from what I've seen are actually pretty good for the most part. Let me think of the ones I've seen. I know there was one that took place at a theater, and that was pretty good. That featured Phoenix, Edgeworth, Maya, the original games cast. But there's also one based on the Miles Edgeworth investigation games that I thought was pretty good. That featured Miles and his equivalent to Maya, which is Kay Faraday. And I don't know, I like the plays. I think they're pretty good.
There's another terrible name on Faraday.
Yeah.
Kay Faraday, Faraday Cage.
Ooh, this is deep.
So I'm guessing, just judging from the fact that most of your favorite cases seem to be in the first game, that the first game is your favorite of at least of the original trilogy.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite. I really like the other games, though. I feel like if I reside on the first game too much, it makes me sound like the first game was great and it went downhill from there. But no, I really like the first game. But the other games in the series are really good. Some of the newer ones, less so. But, you know.
I feel like that happens with most things. Is, the quality will dip and sometimes rise back up.
Even though the most recent games, being the great Ace Attorney games, I think are really good. Like, I really like those games. And I think the soundtrack for those games is actually probably the best in the series. Like, there were points while playing the great Ace Attorney in which I, stopped playing it just to listen to the background music because I really liked it.
That's how you know it's good. When you're just all right, I'm just going to sit here for a minute and just vibe.
A lot of games I've played where I feel that way in the final boss room where it's just like, I'm just going to wait. Hold on, I'll get to you in a minute. This is too good.
It's just, I really like the soundtrack, especially for the courtroom, because because the Great Ace Attorney takes place in the past, very vague. I think it's Victorian era. I could be wrong.
Isn't one of the characters I want to say it's Sherlock Holmes?
It's Sherlock Holmes. In the original, it was Sherlock Holmes. They changed it. They changed it to Sherlock Holmes, and I think that's very good. But yeah, it takes place around that era, and it focuses, and the music, I think, sort of reflects that. And the game focuses on the main character is obviously not Phoenix Wright because he was not alive. It's one of Phoenix's ancestors, Ryunosuke Naruhodo, which I could be pronouncing that wrong. Also, the last name is Phoenix's last name in Japanese.
Yeah.
Because they've changed it, obviously.
Yeah. Amusingly enough, in Japan, his name has more to do with dragons, whereas in the West, we went with Phoenix.
And yeah, it focuses on him, and yeah, I think it's a pretty good game. I think it's pretty good. There are obviously some aspects of it that I don't care for, but I think overall it's good. It's also one of the few games. Okay, so this is somewhat of a tangent, but the original games used 2D and a 2D art style, right?
Yes.
Then around
fantastic.
And in Ace Attorney 5, they switched to 3D, and I think it looks worse. I don't like it that much, especially because some of the characters, they just didn't translate well to 3D. I feel the best example is Clavier Gavin, who I really like how he looks in 2D, and I think he looks really ugly in 3D, and I'm not going to stop complaining about it. But I feel the Great Ace Attorney really actually utilizes the 3D, specifically in the segments with Sherlock Holmes, because there are sections of it where you do the quote-unquote, dance of deduction, where, Sherlock will give his explanation of what he thinks happened in a case, and it will be, sort of right, but very wrong. He'll kind of, he'll, say the basic things right, and then we'll get, a couple details really wrong. He'll point out all the right things, and they'll be and that's why this person is a Russian spy, and it's that's not correct at all. So you, as the main character, have to, correct him, and, present the correct conclusions and point out what you're actually supposed to be thinking. And in those segments, the fact that they're 3D, I think really works because they swivel around the characters a lot, spotlights will go on characters. It's all very dramatic. And I really like those segments, and I think it really works there. So
the original games weren't really designed with 3D in mind. So yeah, they don't utilize it very well. I mean, for the most part, the old games were basically a static background with the individual character sprites reacting to various things, sometimes absolutely fantastically. Everybody has a panicked animation, which are all fantastic. Everybody has sort of a gloating or a trying to correct you sort of image.
Yeah, the original sprites are very good, and I feel one especially noticeable thing is I don't know if you were alluding to this earlier, but the breakdowns at the end of each case, where there's a certain point in the case where whoever you're accusing and whoever actually killed them will essentially start freaking out and then be all right, I did it. And those sections are always really good.
Yeah,
Especially because, like, there are certain sections where, like, a character will, like, start, like, tearing out their hair, or, like, will become visibly, like, frazzled, or, like, start, like, scratching themselves.
Face,
It's
yeah.
really good. And it's really good.
It's a very good, like, visual representation of them, like, mentally breaking down now that they've been caught.
Yeah, and it visually, like, really sells the fact that this is, like, the big moment in the case, where it, like, really gets you into it, like, visually. And, like, I really like those bits.
Like in most, detective stories or true crime novels and things like that, there's just that, like, big final moment, the big climax where everything comes together. And yeah, Phoenix Wright does those fantastically.
I just want to chime in here really quick because talking about Ryunosuke Naruhodo, just because we've talked about the puns, I really am a big fan of wordplay. His last name stuck out to me, and that's what a pun is. Naruhodo translates roughly to I see or I understand in Japanese. So there's the joke.
There's the pun that they ended up replacing with right.
Pretty solid one.
Yeah, again, I have to give a lot of credit to the localization team for this, because they had to find a way to make a lot of puns in a different language work in English.
Yeah, some of the translation decisions are kind of silly, like deciding that Maya's favorite food is no longer ramen, but is instead hamburgers. But they do a pretty good job translating the puns.
I mean, in fairness, that would be my one complaint about localization is some things stop making sense in a few places because of the localization.
Yeah, like they try to make the game very Americanized, and it almost comes off as weird because none of the visuals change.
Yeah, it's supposed to take place in San Francisco in the American version, and every exterior shot is so clearly Japan, it's ridiculous.
There's also the fact that because it takes place in San Francisco in the translation, I'm pretty sure Francisca was originally supposed to be American.
Yeah,
but it wouldn't make sense if they did that, so they make her German. But the thing is, in Ace Attorney 4, Clavier also is originally supposed to be, like, very American. Like, he's supposed to be, like, kind of being like, oh, no, I'm American, guys. Like, to be, like, for clout or whatever, because I guess, like, American culture is kind of like a thing in Japan. Like, aesthetically, I guess. But, like, it makes less sense because they're like, okay, we'll just change that to German, too. But, like, flexing the fact that you're German isn't really a thing here.
No, not so much.
I think it depends whether you're going for, like, Bavarian or a very different aesthetic.
Like you could make something like that work, but yeah, it is such a weird, it's trying to be like, no, I'm from this Western culture as opposed to this other Western culture.
Or this Western culture at a very specific time.
Actually, the case I mentioned, there's a big part of it dealing with what side of the car people were sitting on. And it's one of those things where they had to actually reverse several of the images because they still wanted it to make sense that it was America.
Jeez, I hadn't even thought about that, but yeah.
So fantastic localization for the most part. There's a bit of silliness there. But I think, honestly, I feel that adds to some of the charm of these games, is they are kind of goofy.
Yeah.
At that point, that shouldn't be the suspension of disbelief.
It's true.
You've already been told, oh, ghosts are totally legit.
It's fair, but it is just one of those things where, like, as somebody who grew up with family that was very obsessed with cars, it's just like, oh, they had to explain that instead of being an American car, this now had to be a European car.
There's also, if we're talking about the supernatural aspect again, I also kind of would like to point out that in Apollo Justice, they kind of just cut out the middleman, and instead of being like, oh, he has like a supernatural friend, just the lawyer is. He has superpowers in that one. Yeah. Essentially. In that Apollo Justice has the power to hyper-focus, basically, on people's, like, little tics that, like, indicate that they're lying. And it's called, like, a perceive ability in the game. And, like, he needs to be, like, wearing, like, a special bracelet to do it. And they also do this with the character Athena Sykes, who's introduced in Ace Attorney 5, in which she can hear people's emotions. Like, literally.
Yeah, you have to have the new gimmick for each game as part of that. But yeah, it's a very interesting world in which, no, ghosts are real. Why do we have why do we have to solve these murder investigations?
I also think it's a little funny that Athena and Apollo literally have supernatural powers. Phoenix has a gift given to him by his friend who can see ghosts. However, the special little gimmick in Edgeworth's game is that he can use logic.
Logic is a superpower. How does that, as someone who hasn't played through the Edgeworth files, how does that work exactly?
It's the ability to you will see in your thing, very cool thing. You will see that there are two different events, and you gotta connect them and be because the knife was near this person and this person was stabbed. It's a knife. The knife killed him, and you combine the two pieces of information to create a new piece of information. There's also, because I'm not that far into the game, but I've heard a good amount about it. There's also the aspect of logic chess, I'm pretty sure, which is when you go into a battle of wits, essentially, with a different character.
Oh, man. That sounds awesome.
That sounds pretty cool. These days I do need to sit down and get into the side games. I've really only played the main line so far.
The things I've seen, the little I've played of Miles Edgeworth Investigations, and the things I've seen of it, is, it seems pretty good. The things I've heard about, the characters Kay Faraday and Sebastian DeBest, they seem very good. They seem like very good characters. I like them. I know a limited amount about them, but I think they seem cool, because Kay Faraday is essentially once Phoenix and Maya stop being the protagonist, they kind of try to replicate the dynamic of it with, obviously, different characters, but characters that kind of fit the dynamic of, straight man lawyer, and then,
kind of fun sidekick, yeah.
Yeah, in the Apollo Justice games, it's Apollo and Trucy, who's actually Phoenix's daughter. In the Miles Edgeworth games, they do a similar thing where his assistant is Kay Faraday, who is a self-proclaimed great thief, which is a hell of a choice for Miles' assistant. And she steals the truth. And she has a whole monologue she goes on about being, again, so forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, but Yakuza? I can't pronounce it. I just realized I can't.
Yakuza?
In my head. It's not a Yakuza. It's not that.
Okay. I was gonna say, that's a very interesting term.
Not a member of the Japanese mafia, or anything. But she, according to her, steals the truth. And, she seems like a lot of fun. And Sebastian DeBest is, in the second Edgeworth game, is another prosecutor, and he's a prodigy, except he's a little not good at it. He's just a little dumb, but very full of himself. He also cries a lot, and he seems, I don't know, this makes it sound like I don't like him. But no, I like him. He seems interesting, and he's kind of I don't want to say antagonist. He's against you for most of the game, but he's also way younger than Miles. So he's not really a bad guy, and the real bad guy is his dad or whatever. I'm explaining this very poorly.
Fine. Although from the sounds of it, the best is a bit more of an ironic pun nickname for him.
Yeah, he thinks he's the best. That's not necessarily true, but he thinks it.
If anything, it should be an incentive for our listeners that if any of this sounds cool, totally go check it out.
There has been a recent re-release of the first 3 games for the Switch. I think they're available on the iPhone as well.
And I believe...
Yeah, they are. And that's where I got the Investigations game aim, and it seems surprisingly intact, given it's on a phone. It's not that, it's not, terribly, poorly done or anything, I don't think, so far.
Always good to hear that it's a decent port. It kind of makes sense. These are, as we said at the beginning, these aren't games that are gonna, challenge your dexterity or your...
Yeah, these are pretty, well accessible games, where it's, you don't need to be, have, really fast reflexes or anything like that. You just need to be able to put information together, and also you don't even need to do that if you look up the answers.
True.
Which I don't do mostly.
It's up to however people want to play the game.
Yeah.
No shame here.
There was one point in the first game that I was just like, I don't understand what I'm missing. I had to look it up, and I had the right idea. I was just presenting it at the wrong time.
There's also like a mini game in the first game that's like the worst thing ever. In Rise from the Ashes, where you have to like adjust the placement of a pot, and I remember. If you've played that part, you know what I mean. It's the worst.
I had forgotten. I was happier having forgotten, I think.
It took me like 30 minutes. I'm not kidding. I had to look it up. I was like, I like didn't want to look it up because it was just adjusting a pot, but I was like, no, I have to look it up. And even then, it took me a good while.
Even knowing what you were looking for, it's just like, this is not a well-designed mechanic.
So precise, and I'm so glad that it was, like, I guess more of like an experimental mechanic that they did not bring back.
A lot of that last case was trying to show off what could be done with the DS as opposed to the Game Boy Advance. And some of it stuck around, and some of it was just, this was a bad idea.
Refreshing to hear that everyone got stuck with that.
Yeah, right? It is one of those things where you're like, how is this difficult? I must be doing something wrong. It's like, no, it's just a little unfortunate that this doesn't.
There was also a good while where I was trying to position it in one position because I knew what I was looking for, but it was just like the wrong position for some reason. I'm pretty sure this is a completely different note. Well, not completely different. I mentioned that it's not a very hard game to play you can just like look things up if you don't know. But I'm pretty sure in the Great Ace Attorney, there's actually, at least for the Switch port, there's actually a game mode option where you can just like watch the story play out. Like if you're not that interested in playing a game, but you are interested in the game, you can just like watch it, basically.
I feel like that would actually be really cool, like going, like if you'd already beaten the first game and you wanted to go back and see what happened before you played the second. I feel like that'd be really useful to have.
Yeah, that's probably a good use for it. Like if you don't want to like replay it or anything.
Yeah, I distinctly remember, like, as the games were originally coming out in the States, like, I had to go back to remind myself who people were in the story. And that's a little difficult when you have to play through the whole case each time to be like, all right, wait, who were you? I know I'm supposed to know you.
So just to really, really wrap things up here, what would you say to people who are interested in anything Ace Attorney?
Where would you say is a good place to start?
This is probably a generic answer, but I feel like the best place to start is with the original games, just because they're, the introduction point for the game, and they're a pretty good setup for the rest of the games. And they're like, the first game is decently simple before all, like, there's a bunch of, like, weird mechanics introduced. So if you like the first game, you'll probably like the other ones. And I don't know, I guess if you see the price tag and you're like, I'm not paying for that, then like, I don't know. Or like, you see the price tag and you're like, I'm not that sure I want to pay for that. Then, you could, I guess, watch a playthrough online. Or you could watch the anime. I think the anime's kind of worse. But it, for the most part, adapts the cases accurately, making only like a couple changes. And it's like, it's not that bad.
I believe, and I probably should double check this before I say that, but if I remember correctly, the first case is available on the phone for free. Because as I recall, they released them like in chapters for the phone version of the game, and I think the first case was free. So you can get an idea of how it plays.
It's not a terribly difficult game. It's pretty cozy, and it's a good time all around. From my experiences, as someone who has read the comics, I would say probably not the best place to start, but definitely if you're a fan, not only are they available at your local library, most likely, especially if you're in the Delaware County system, they're great supplements, and the stories are really fun. It feels like you're playing the game.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to have to check them out.
I can't stress it enough. It's worth it.
Right here. Yeah.
They are here, and they are so much fun.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure talking with you and having you here to talk about Ace Attorney.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear that there are still people finding this game. Like, I think I was your age when I first played it, and it was fantastic then.
Yeah, I really love these games.
And this has been the Geek Out podcast of the Lansdowne Library. If you would like to appear on an episode of the Geek Out podcast, you can head to lansdownlibraries.org/podcast and click the green register here button.